What's interesting about that as well is this idea of resonance, you know, like, so what attracts a spirit to a person or vice versa,
Exactly.
you know. So you mentioned, you know, that the spirit is still stuck in a way of, in a form of thinking, a particular form of thinking. Well, I would offer the possibility that so is the person on earth in some way or another, and that is why they've drawn them. So I didn't find it a coincidence that whenever I reported on a darker experience that somebody has, and there are a few in Spirit Sisters, and the one in particular that I'm thinking of at the moment is a woman who was not the victim of, because how much did she create this, but there was a horrific poltergeist-style haunting in her home in Dubbo, New South Wales, when she was a teenager. Now, there was, you know, she had done a lot of meddling and dabbling with things that she didn't really understand, like a Ouija board, and, you know, and there was lots of darkness within her because very sadly her home situation wasn't happy. Yeah. There was abuse, you know, so it's this idea of darkness attracting darkness as well. And she was obvious. And you know, it was also her empathy that didn't allow her to be in the workplace, because she told me that she couldn't be in an open plan office because she was literally sensing and picking up everything that was going on in her colleagues' lives, the good, the bad and the ugly, and it was too much for her. So there was this idea of these gifts, for want of a better word, being, you know, not harnessed or not that the person is struggling with them, but if they were to find boundaries or find ways to work with their abilities, then their lives are going to blossom and flourish in a better way. This message came through in another interviewee who had this incredible experience of grief awakening her psychic abilities, and she would see a room full of dead people. She would wake in the middle of the night.
You got to accentuate the positive.
Wow, I feel good. A little bit of feel good goes a long way.
You're listening to Swain, teacher of deliberate creation, accentuating the positive, showing you a way to a better life.
Accentuating the positive, it's not just fad, it's sanity. Who in their right mind would accentuate anything else?
If you feel like that's what you want to do.
Portuguese surname.
Oh, it's a Portuguese
name. So I'm Uruguayan. Oh, well, I don't know if you want, I can tell you this when we start, but from my dad was born on the border of Uruguay and Brazil, so that's why it's he speaks Portuguese, I don't, but that's why it's a Portuguese surname.
Oh, there we go. Well, I just recorded that. Okay. We're off and running.
Okay.
Hello and welcome to another show, Accentuating the Positive with Karen Swain. So wonderful to be with you today. Have I got a treat for you today? I've got a brilliant Australian writer, investigator, researcher. I don't know, what do we call you? Karina Machado here.
Writer will do.
Writer, I know. We're going to discuss her books of all things afterlife related, paranormal, psychic ability, enlightenment, all that sort of stuff. We're going to discuss her books. Welcome to the show, Karina. So great to have you on the show.
Thank you, Karen. It's such a pleasure to be here. I'm really excited. I've been listening to your podcasts for months now, since I discovered them. I can't remember how I discovered them, but it was such a delight. And so I'm really honoured to be here. Thank you.
Let me tell you how we met. So funny. So there's a charity here called A Sound Life, which I've spoken about on the show before. Ido Khan, who I've had on the show before, started it with his partner, Joe. We had Ido on the show a few years ago because Joe, who was this just divine, gorgeous creature, died very suddenly in her 30s. And Joe and Ido started a Sound Life charity. And what they do is they go into hospitals and facilities where there is, you know, like Down syndrome people, old people's homes, or sort of fragile, I think they call them fragile people. And they teach them mindfulness and yoga, or they sing, like all these musicians go in and they sing for these people and they just love it. So anyway, I had been thinking for years that I'll go in and do that because I've been seeing the charities go on. And I eventually did it and went into a couple of hospitals with a Sound Life charity how long ago was it? A few months ago, a couple of months ago?
So when we went, it was just before Christmas. Yeah.
Just before Christmas.
Yeah.
And there was too many of us to fit in the minibus. So I had my car. I said, oh, well, I'll take a couple of people. And Karina's one of the people I took. So she's sitting in the front seat of the car. We're chatting away. And I started quizzing her as I do, you know. And she started telling me about her books. And I'm like, oh, my God. I said, I think I have to have you on the show. You know, I've got this podcast show. And she goes, oh, I know exactly who you are.
It was so funny.
Sitting in the car with someone she'd been listening to.
Yeah.
You've been listening to me not on YouTube but on audio, right?
That's right. I listen on audio.
Staring at my face. So
Exactly.
It was so funny. There was this person in the car that you've been listening to. It was so funny.
It was great. When all the pieces fell into place, I thought, oh, this is fantastic. This is just great. And we had such a good day singing that day, didn't we?
We did. Such a great charity. It's so great.
Beautiful.
Look, it's amazing how incredible the universe is, you know, how it lines you up with people.
Yeah.
You know, I have this absolute faith and trust that everything that happens is happening for me, you know, for me and my desires. But it's not a personal thing. It's not about me and my desires, but it's about my desire to want to, you know, reach more people and help more people and expand this consciousness. And you have that same desire. And so,
yes,
you know, when you're really lined up with your desire, just all this synchronicity happens all the time, don't you find?
Absolutely. Yeah. And because we are all connected, it's a web, you know, when we begin to attend to those desires and to want to serve from a true place of open-heartedness, that can't but assist another. It must.
Yeah.
You know, so it's beautiful. Yeah. So I'm thrilled to know you, Karen, and to be here.
Let me read your bio. Okay. I'm just going to go. It's only a small bio today. So Karina Machado, born in Uruguay, was 2 when her parents immigrated to Sydney, Australia. Yay. She grew up hearing stories of her mum's psychic gifts, which ignited a lifelong curiosity about life after death and other mysteries. Passionate about books and writing since she taught herself to read with the little golden books, Karina always knew she had to work with words. Yeah. And after majoring in English at University of New South Wales, she began her career in journalism as an editorial assistant at Time magazine in 1994, and also is a former senior editor for a big magazine here in Australia called Who magazine. Is Who magazine also international?
Well, Who began life as the Australian sister publication of People magazine, which is a huge weekly magazine in the US. So, yeah, so Who initially, before it was sold to another company, was part of that family of Time Inc. magazines, which included Time and Life. So big masthead, yeah.
Karina is the author of a few books, Spirit Sisters in 2009, which is fascinating, which is just so many stories of people's encounters with, well, I suppose we could call them ghosts or spirits or angels or phenomena.
Yep.
That is not the mainstream. It's like all the stuff we talk about on this show, but not mainstream. Where Spirits Dwell in 2011 and Love Never Dies in 2014.
Yeah.
And they're all pretty similar, really. They're all a lot of people's stories.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love people's stories. I love hearing stories. I feel that they're gifts to me. I feel very honoured and privileged when I'm gifted with a story. Yes, each book is an anthology of stories. And, but as you say, the books are all connected. They're a series. They're a trilogy. Yes, they're a trilogy. So, so they went from Spirit Sisters, which was a very broad range of experiences, to Love Never Dies, which was just the one kind of experience, which is people sensing the spirit of a loved one of theirs who's passed away. So it's, in a way, the books tell the story of my understanding evolving, you know, and my me coming to the understanding of the power of love in our lives, you know, and what, the immense role that it plays.
Look, absolutely. You know, curiosity, I think, brings a lot of people to these types of books, curiosity or grief. So when people are grieving the loss of a loved one, or maybe they're even scared of their own death, I think you said that at the beginning of one of your books, that you were actually terrified of death too, weren't you?
Yes, I was, in a way that's what sparked this. There are various roads that led to me writing Spirit Sisters, my first book, but one of them, as you say, was me being a child of 7 or 8 and being terrified of dying. And I think that's not uncommon. I think children at around that age tend to go through this fascination with what lies beyond and what comes after, and the idea of physical death. And I was no different. And I'd read, for me, what triggered that was reading in a kid's textbook that one day the sun would actually obliterate the earth. And this was not an if, but a when. You know, it's billions of years away or something like that. But the fact was the science textbook said it would happen. And so I just got stuck on that idea as a child. And I was terrifying myself, really. But it was this idea, this fascination about this world beyond our physical life, our physical senses, that drew me out of that fear, and it gave me hope. And so for me, ever since, I've been intrigued by the possibility that's innate in these experiences to gift us hope, you know, and that is what I've always tried to concentrate on in the stories. And I guess they're the message of my books, and probably the overreaching message of my work is this idea of the afterlife bringing us hope.
Well, not only does it bring us hope, it brings us enlightenment, really. I mean,
Yes.
it's an avenue into enlightenment. I mean, we could sit at the foot of the guru and om and chant and, you know, read the Vedas or the Bible or the Buddhist stuff. You know, we can do all that, or we can investigate the afterlife, because it brings us to an understanding of love, like you said, which is what Love Never Dies is about. And that, you know, as I was reading your books yesterday and today, and as I'm listening to all the stories and people talking about, you know, the love, because I think people grieve when they feel like there's a love that they've lost, whether it's a child, a partner, or a parent, that there's some love emanating from them that's now no longer on this earth.
Yes.
And so they feel like they've lost love. And when you do go down that rabbit hole of afterlife investigation, you realize that that love never came from that person. That love is who we are. It's where we come from.
Yeah,
it's how we exist both here and there.
Exactly.
And that we have to stop looking for it inside another human. I mean, they've got their love, we've got our love, but it's about giving love, not seeking it. And so,
oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah. So I think that's where all these stories lead to.
Yes.
And so it's an enlightening journey, even if the journey feels like grief at the moment. You know?
That's right. That's absolutely true. You put it beautifully, Karen. You put it beautifully. And we're all, I guess, at different markers on this road to understanding that, you know, that power within us, that love that is the very kind of ground of our being. Yeah.
So let's get into the books, because they're just fascinating. There's so many stories. How did you meet all these people? I have to say, I was reading Spirit Sisters, because you did that in 2009, right? And you said that it went quite viral here in I don't know, did it sold well across the world?
It sold well. It was, you know, I was a first-time author. I was a professional journalist, but I was a first-time author. And so, you know, the publishing industry, they don't tend to put too much money behind, you know, publicizing the first-time authors. Let's just say that. But my publishing company was great anyway. I was so happy to. But yes, it just sort of took off, and on little legs of its own, I like to say. Like, it was just extraordinary. It was a true word of mouth hit, I think. Yeah. I think, you know, people told their friends about it. They told their friends, and I think also looking back, you know, trying to sort of from this perspective ascertain what made Spirit Sisters such a hit, because it was the only one of my books to be sold in the UK as well, so which was wonderful. But I think the title Spirit Sisters was very appealing to the audience, to the readers. And even the image on the cover of the original cover, which was a little girl reaching up to a ball of light. So within that image, and she was kind of an ethereal, you know, some would say spooky looking image of a little girl, but at the same time, this idea of her reaching up to the light. So those two ideas joined together, and the words Spirit Sisters, all of that, the idea of the sisterhood, I think it just all wove together to create something that people were very drawn to.
Oh, dang, you've done well. Look, I don't know how you meet all these people. How did you meet? Because there's so many people just in Spirit Sisters. How many people did you talk to?
Oh, in Spirit Sisters, I think I probably spoke to at least 100, people, or had, contact with them. And then the number of interviews that the number of stories within the book was less than that because, the editing and whatnot, and you couldn't actually fit them all in. But with Spirit Sisters, the way I found most of my interviewees was I had a little piece published in the Sunday Telegraph. Well, it wasn't my article. Somebody published an article in the Sunday Telegraph in the body and soul section. And through my contacts in the publishing industry, I was able to just get a little tag added to the end of this person's article, which was about the spirit world. And the little tag that I was lucky enough to get added on said, Sydney journalist Karina Machado is seeking women's experiences of the paranormal. If you have a story, email me. So I was not prepared for the influx of stories. I was actually stunned to have my inbox flooded. There was this real desire that women had, and I was only calling for women's stories at that point. And we can talk about why that was later, but I couldn't believe it. There's a real hunger. I found a real hunger for people to share these stories in a safe kind of platform. Yeah.
Well, like, who else is doing it? Everyone's talking about the size of people's butts and, who's married to who and all that sort of stuff. Like who. Everyone's talking about people, what they're doing. But there's not a lot of people like you. Well, there was more now.
Yeah.
I haven't found too many in Sydney that are really documenting this stuff. There's groups and mediums galore, and there's people talking to dead people in groups and stuff like that. But there's not a lot of people documenting this and gathering people's stories and allowing this information to come out of closets.
Yes, there's a real sense of coming out of the closet.
Yeah.
And there were many people that I spoke to who said, I've never told anybody this, or most of them would say, you're going to think I'm crazy, but I'm going to tell you anyway. And they would say that so many times. And then they would share an experience. That's why I said earlier that I did feel so privileged, because in many of the cases, it was the first time or one of the very few times they'd ever even voiced this experience. There was one story in Spirit Sisters. I call it, I don't know if you've read this one, Karen, it's called The Reluctant Medium. And it's a story about a nurse in rural New South Wales who has this extraordinary ability to see the dead. And she was not at peace with her gift. She found it very confronting, very painful. She was afraid of it. She was married to a man who was very, in the physical, he would say, unless I can see it and feel it, it's not real. So she just kept her mouth shut. And but there was one, so she had to be coaxed to talk to me. So a fellow interviewee who had spoken to me knew her and coaxed this person into sharing her stories with me. So but one of the things that she said that I've never forgotten is that she had the ability to see the loved ones at people's bedsides, because she was a nurse. She would see people that were passing, and she could actually see looking clear as day, sometimes as physical as you or I, the spirit of the person waiting there patiently to take their loved one home. And she said of everything that she could see and know about the spirit world, that gave her immense comfort, because she knew that we're never alone. We don't go alone. We certainly don't leave here alone. Never. So that was wonderful to speak with her. And I'll never forget that when I first started the interview, it was almost like her voice was very small and choked. It was like she literally had trouble getting the words out. And then towards the end, she sounded brighter and better, and it was almost like a burden had been lifted,
Makes me cry.
Yeah.
That's why your work is, your work, my work, and anyone else that's like documenting people's stories and giving them a platform is so important.
So important.
Because, the reason this woman, because I'm asking my guides, why didn't she feel comfortable with that gift? Because there's so many people like, I want that gift. And so I'm like, why didn't she feel comfortable with that gift? And they said to me, because people vilify it.
That's right.
Everyone wants to be included and connected to other beings on earth. And when you come out with like, I see dead people, people go, no, you don't. They make you wrong. They vilify you. They say you're strange. And And, you know, especially in a hospital environment.
Oh, God, yeah. And you're talking about a small town in country New South Wales as well.
Exactly.
And you're right about the word vilify, because in her words to me were very telling. She said, I'd be burnt at the stake. That's what she said. So it's very telling. That was her quote. So, yeah, it's very telling.
Oh, my God. Now I'm tuning into her. No, don't go there. I'm like, she probably was in a past life. Yes. But, you know, there are reasons we have these. I don't call them gifts, I have to say. I don't call them gifts. And reading your book, this is what came up, because I'm listening to story after story after story. When I say listening, because I'm listening, you know, I get the book to read to me.
Yes.
And then you say that somebody says, you know, I can't remember somebody you were talking to. It might have been Jeffrey Mishlove. Somebody said, you know, these aren't gifts. This is everybody has this. This is like, it's not a gift. This is an ability that we develop or shut down. And that's exactly how I feel about it. You know, when people say you're so gifted, it's like, no, I'm not. It's like saying I can see is gifted. Like everyone can see.
Yes.
I don't see that well anymore, hence the glasses. But we all have different abilities. You know, some people can really see and some people can't. And it's the same with these, you know, abilities.
Exactly. It's like, you know, you might be able to sit down at a keyboard and bash out a few notes, but you're not, you know, a great composer. Like, we all have different levels, you know, of abilities, and some people are extremely talented and gifted in the arts or in what may be. And I think it's the same with these abilities that, as you say, are natural and innate to our humanity. But in some people, they are finely tuned. And you could say that there's a spectrum, you know, of talent within, say, a person who's a medium. You could have on the lower end of the spectrum, what we could all probably relate to is this idea of thinking of somebody and then suddenly the phone rings and it's them. So that's on the lower end of the spectrum. And then on the higher end of the spectrum, you see somebody like my reluctant medium interviewee who could see the dead, you know, standing right there. And she told a wonderful story, Karen, as well, about a little boy in Edwardian clothing who would appear to her while she was the mum of 3, you know, keeping like busy with her home and her work and her family. And she'd be washing the dishes and he'd appear, and he was wearing his, you know, Edwardian kind of knickerbockers and a frilled shirt, and he had ringleted hair. And he'd be saying, help me, help me, help me. And she did not know how to help him, you know. And I think that was a part of her frustration as well, because she didn't actually know what she was meant to do to assist them. So I gave her some references and some people to speak to, and, you know, some pointers based on my basic knowledge of sending them to the light. And hopefully that might have helped her or not, but I'm not sure. But I think there was that fear and frustration in her as well, that she wasn't sure what to do with them.
This is what I found so fascinating about reading all those stories, was a common theme. And I just want to say to people who are listening to this too, if you want to support ATP Media, I'm going to put all my affiliate links on my webpage, which I'll have a link underneath, if you want to buy Karina's books, because they're just brilliant. They're beautiful.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Buy them on my affiliate links and I get a couple of cents. Woohoo! Support the show. Anyway, is that confusion about having these experiences. So what do I do with this? Like, I'm seeing a boy in period, you know, like shuffling down hallways and stuff like that. I think I remember telling you about when we were together in the car about that guy I interviewed who saw the woman in period dress in the hallway.
Yes.
And he freaked out, and he told his wife, and his wife goes, oh, thank God you can see her too. And he said, you can see her? He said, yeah, I didn't want to say anything. I think you'd think I was crazy. But what happened was that experience of seeing this woman in this hallway who looked as solid as you and I, dressed in period dress. He lived in an apartment, right? And he was a few stories up. And his immediate thought was, how did she scale the wall in that dress?
I love that because it's that meeting of both worlds, you know, that collision. It's great.
It's such a funny thing. Yeah. Funny thing to think. Like, someone's broken into my home. They're in period dress. How did they scale the wall wearing that? But she told him a story about her death, and she was murdered, and he looked it up and verified. But she actually turned up because he turned out to be a professional medium, and now he worked. He quit his job and now he's so there are reasons that these things happen. Yes. They're not random.
Exactly.
Things. And, you know, tuning into your nurse, the reluctant medium, you know, the reluctance comes from her thinking that her life's all about what she thinks it's about, and it's not. she's kind of got with the programming that she's there to help people, but she's helping them in this really mainstream way. And actually, she had planned to do it in a more expanded way, in a way. And she was, not getting with the program really. But she was being reluctant about it, she was being reluctant. Yeah.
She was. There was a real resistance that I sensed in her. And now, 10 years down the track from the publication of Spirit Sisters, I'm looking to launch a podcast in which I'll revisit some of these key stories of mine in all 3 of my books. And I think it would be great for me to try and find this lady and see what has happened, what has changed in her life, what acceptance she's come or not come to within the last decade.
That would be really good. Yes, so everyone has to support Karina's podcast. You're not going to do it on YouTube, or are you going to do it on YouTube? You're going to do it on audio only podcast?
For now, that's the plan. Yeah, that's the plan for now.
What are you going to call the podcast?
I think it'll be Spirit Sisters.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the idea behind it is to celebrate the 10th anniversary of this book that was such a powerful force in my life and that resonated with so many readers, and also to revisit my interviewees, but also to unearth new stories. And one of the things I've really become fascinated with, Karen, in the last couple of years or more is, and I've told you this, near-death experiences. I find that within those stories, and we always come back to the power of storytelling, but within those stories lies a key, a really powerful healing mechanism to help us navigate life on this physical earth, That's what I sense, like there's something very powerful in these experiences, and these people that have them are like these brave, intrepid explorers who go to the other side and then come back with these treasures for us. Mm. And it's, how much we're willing to listen and take on this advice that they give us, So I'm fascinated with NDEs at the moment.
Yeah, a lot of people look at NDEs because they're fascinated about where we go.
Yeah.
But NDEs, it's not really so much about where we go. It's about how we can take the knowledge from that while we're here.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. And I know a lot of people, I get sort of vilified on the YouTube under comments. They don't have them under iTunes, so people don't write under iTunes. But because I'm more about the message from the NDE than the actual, well, what did it look like and who was there and, like the description of the place.
Yeah.
Because we can go there anytime. We're there when we're dreaming.
Very good point. That's a very good point, Karen.
And
no, sorry, I was just going to say, because you're right, because what we see in the NDE, I imagine, has the richness and the variation of a dream, so it'll be personalized in a way.
Absolutely.
Whereas the message, what you're saying, is what counts, and the way that the NDE experiencer is going to receive that message will vary. But the proof is in the pudding, as the cliche goes, because the message is so often the same. Love one another, It make every moment count. Like, how many ways? It's almost like, how many ways can we say the same thing? And
until we get it. Why don't we get it? We're not getting it. It's not just loving one. Well, loving one another helps, but it's loving. It's love. It's like loving everything. It's like knowing we're loved, and when we do know we're loved. I went to dinner the other night, and there was a gorgeous woman there who has a charity raising money for girls in Africa. And I said, well, specifically, what about the girls? And it's really about genital mutilation. And then she told me about what goes on. And I just sat there thinking, how does this happen?
Yes.
And she said, it's not a religious thing. It's a money thing, because they basically sew them up so that they are virgins and they're worth more money when they sell them to their husbands. And I'm just like, oh my God, how does this happen on this planet?
Yeah.
And so I listen to stories like this and I think, this love message just needs to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. It's like, there can't be enough of it. It just,
That's so true, it's so true. And how do we do it? I don't know, because, as you say, like, it's very easy to despair when we hear about the ways, and they seem to be infinite, for man to, be inhumane against fellow man. And how do we not despair? How do we? It's about, I guess, what we focus on grows. So if we can know that, as you say, that these are horrific things go on, but still choose love and still choose to focus on love. And it's a moment by moment choice. I mean, within our lives, every day we're faced with choice upon choice. You know, and it's about remembering. And it'll be small things. It'll be small things that will trigger us. It won't be, you know, such a huge issue as genital mutilation or, you know, that we're faced with in our day-to-day lives every day, most hopefully anyway. But still the choice is the same, you know. Yeah. And it's, probably about staying in a certain vibration so that we can make a difference.
And, you know, one of the messages of the NDEs too is the life review. You know, what you do to another, it's like a classic teaching in all spiritual traditions. What you do to another, you do to yourself. And we don't understand that from this sort of singular perspective.
Exactly.
But when you re-emerge, you have a more unified perspective, and so you actually feel what you've done to other people.
Yes.
And as if it's being done to you.
I know. How extraordinary is that?
How extraordinary. And I think that, you know, this is what we need to be more of in this plane. We need to and that's why all these expanded awarenesses like empathy, where people are feeling everybody, and all these poor empathetic people, when I say poor, they're feeling everyone's pain and they're
suffer.
Freaking out. But, you know, how do I navigate this empathy? So anyway, we're going to chat about this all day.
We could.
Let's talk more about some of the stories and and In Love Never Dies. I didn't read the third one or the middle one.
The middle one you didn't read, Where Spirits Dwell, which is about people going through hauntings.
Oh, it's hauntings, is it?
Hauntings.
Well, I have to say, as I was reading it, one of the things, because you had a bit of haunting stuff in Spirit Sisters. Yes. And you know, it goes into the sort of horrific like story, but there's always kind of a happy ending. It reminded me of Sixth Sense, you know, like the whole show is about the haunting, like the little boy's like terrified, I see. Yeah. But right at the end of the movie, there's a reason, and it's only his ignorance that created the fear, which is what all hauntings are about. Because it's only people's ignorance that creates the fear, because it's some core spirit or soul who has still maintained their connection to their ignorance or their limiting thoughts or ideas about themselves. Even though they've dropped the body, they haven't dropped the mind. Yes. And so they've stayed on this dimension. As you've said in Spirit Sisters, there's a couple of dimensions, like you stay here or you cross over. Many people talk about that. Yep. And they're trying to navigate their negative thoughts from, you know, a spirit perspective, still on the earth plane. Do you want to talk more about that?
Yes, and I think what's interesting about that as well is this idea of resonance, you know, like, so what attracts a spirit to a person, or vice versa, you know. So you mentioned, you know, that the spirit is still stuck in a way of in a form of thinking, a particular form of thinking. Well, I would offer the possibility that so is the person on earth in some way or another, and that is why they've drawn them. So I didn't find it a coincidence that whenever I reported on a darker experience that somebody has, and there are a few in Spirit Sisters, and the one in particular that I'm thinking of at the moment is a woman who was not the victim of, because how much did she create this, but there was a horrific poltergeist style haunting in her home in Dubbo, New South Wales, when she was a teenager. Now, there was, you know, she had done a lot of meddling and dabbling with things that she didn't really understand, like a Ouija board, and, you know, and there was lots of darkness within her because very sadly her home situation wasn't happy. Yeah. There was abuse, you know, so it's this idea of darkness attracting darkness as well. And she was obviously, again, this is, you know, my perspective, just having spoken to her, a very gifted medium. So, and it's this empathy that's, you know, as wide ranging as you can imagine, that has drawn in this spirit who's the same as her, really. It's difficult, but I do believe there's resonance.
Yeah, absolutely. Law of attraction. Yeah, law of attraction just doesn't happen on the earth plane. It's happening in all dimensions. Yes. And even when we're in another dimension, we're still like attracts like. So if we're holding a frequency or a set of beliefs, then you're going to attract a similar vibration. Yeah.
And I think, it's taken me years to really understand that. Like I understood sort of the nugget of that truth back then when I was telling this lady's story. But it's now with the further reading and the understanding and the delving into spirituality more than spirits, that I've come to these conclusions about sort of the oneness and the all-encompassing quality that has, that creates quote unquote hauntings, or call them what you may. So basically no coincidence that when a situation is very dark, then you get a very dark story.
Likewise, we attract people into our life that are a vibrational match. We can attract people that just don't have bodies. Or spirits. And when it's all vibration, so it's when you hold a loving, kind vibration, you're also attracting loving, kind spirits or entities or thought forms.
That's right.
Into your life, and angels, like lots of nurses who are just awesome, work with the angelic realm in hospitals, because they're kind, loving people. And maybe some nurses who have become tired and exhausted from the nursing system and they're all negative thoughts. Likewise, they're attracting spirits that maybe there are dead people in the hospital that died that didn't know that they died, and so grumpy nurses are attracting them, following them around.
And it teaches us, because we might not understand the vibration that we're holding. We think outwardly we're one thing, but these life experiences that we draw in, whether they're on this earth plane or beyond, they show us exactly what we are inside. As somebody said, we see life as we are. As we are.
Exactly. Yeah. What else did we have in spirits? What were some of the things that stood out for you? I know it was 2009, it was a while ago, but some of that really rocked your world. When you were investigating this, what were some of the people that rocked your world? So the poltergeist one must have.
Oh, yeah, it did. And I travelled to Dubbo to meet that lady. And certainly what stuck out to me when I met her was that she was so traumatized by what had happened to her as a 14-year-old. And when I met her, she was nearly 40. Wow. And that really stayed with me, that the way that we can carry these experiences inside us and how they can inform the rest of our lives. For this lady, I remember she had a very severe spinal disorder, which caused her a lot of pain and meant that she couldn't actually go into the workforce. And so she was living, a very quiet, some might say a kind of a stifled life. And, it was also her empathy that didn't allow her to be in the workplace, because she told me that she couldn't be in an open plan office because she was literally sensing and picking up everything that was going on in her colleagues' lives, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And it was too much for her. So there was this idea of these gifts, for want of a better word, being, not harnessed, or not that the person is struggling with them. But if they were to find boundaries or find ways to work with their abilities, then their lives are going to blossom and flourish in a better way. This message came through in another interviewee who had this incredible experience of grief awakening her psychic abilities. And she would see a room full of dead people. She would wake in the middle of the night. This is after a terrible grief, which was, I think, her mother's suicide and the miscarriage of a longed for baby. So this opened her up to this world that was like something you can imagine out of a film. Like, she would see her bed surrounded by people in all different kinds of period costume, like Hollywood. And they were all just standing there, calling her, wanting her. And so she found a way with help and support. She kind of set opening hours. You can come between this time and that time, but not this time. So that was another message too, that we have to learn, if this has happened to us, we have to learn how to work with these abilities. The other interesting message that came through was what triggers something like this. This is fascinating, and there are different ways. So with this particular lady, there was grief. It can be puberty. In some women it was pregnancy. That there are these certain life phases. There's trauma and abuse, as well, that can trigger. There are so many different ways to trigger this kind of altered state of consciousness, I guess it is, which invites expanded expansion. That's what it is, an expanded awareness, exactly. So there was that, and there's one particular story that I love, and it's called The Family. I don't know if you read that one, Karen. It's about
Sure, I did.
a woman who, when she was about 8, she went to a sleepover at her friend's house across the road. And she had often gone to this little girl's house for a sleepover. But on this particular night, she woke up in the middle of the night and there was suddenly a family of 3 standing in front of her in colonial or Edwardian clothing. And it was a father, a mother, and a little boy. And it was like a stare off, they just stared at each other for quite a few minutes. And then the mother whispered something into her little boy's ear, and he nodded, and then he took a couple of steps forward and reached out to poke my interviewee Amy in the leg, and that's when the only time that she screamed, and the spell was broken, and they disappeared at that point. But what I love about that story is this idea of the interactive quality, like we can interact. They're conscious too. And it's this idea that's in a movie like The Sixth Sense and in a movie like The Others, which is one of my favorite ghost movies, starring Nicole Kidman. Who's haunting who,
Who's haunting who? Absolutely.
Yeah.
I have to say, it's fascinating to me because I don't have those experiences, but I have experiences that other people don't have. But I had an experience recently where I was in the shower and I saw this hideous face, and I knew immediately that somebody had been shot in the face. And I had this this pain and nosebleeds where he had been shot in the face. So I knew he was getting my attention by giving me these physical symptoms.
Yeah.
And he was just wanting help. And I just said, listen to your spirit guides.
Yeah.
But it's vibrational frequency. Like I don't speak to dead people who are at a certain vibration.
Yeah.
But if they have evolved, because I've got contact with my mob, I call them, my guides, who have an intention, let's call it intention, let's not call it higher or lower, that has an intention that I have the same intention, right?
Yep.
So I have clear access to them, but not like I don't see ghosts and stuff like that, like other people do. So it fascinates me when I hear these stories.
Yeah, it's extraordinary.
Because I don't have that experience that people can interact with ghosts and dead people in different, either, like walking this earth in their astral body, or who have crossed over to a second earth. Did you listen to Cyrus Kirkpatrick talk about second earth?
No.
He's someone that helped me with the first book, Awaken by Death. He's an author and he's had many books, and he has these astral experiences where he has he goes to second earth, which is a complete astral replica of earth in an astral form, which I think a lot of these so-called ghosts live. And then there are there's this bleed through between that dimension and this dimension where we have this interaction with second earth. And
I like that idea of bleed through. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah. And you talk about too in your book, there's like a bleed through in time where people are, do you want to talk a few stories about that?
Yeah, I'm fascinated with, they're known as time slips. And if I'm always intrigued to hear time slip stories. If anyone would like to reach out with their time slip story to me, please do. I love them. There's actually not that many that I've come across. In my book, I tell a story in Spirit Sisters of a woman who is driving her car on a route that she drove very often. It was in Perth, I remember. And she suddenly heard the sound of an aircraft very low. And she thought, what is that? And she looked up and she saw a vintage aircraft. And at the time she was able to identify what kind of vintage aircraft it was. And it was low enough that the pilot looked down at her and waved. Now, this was not, nobody else was alert or alarmed by the idea of this plane, like nobody else around her, fellow drivers. So she understood that only she could see it. And she later found out there was a certain airport that serviced, I can't quite remember how the story went, but she found out that there was an airport nearby that was active during, you know, the Second World War, or during a time when I can't actually recall how it went, but she made the connection. So there's an idea there that the times collided in that moment. Again, what brought that collision into play? I would suspect that it's a form of resonance between her and that pilot. Something drew them to each other in that moment that opened the doorway. But
okay, so
yeah.
was she seeing a past life of hers?
Possibly.
You know, she could have been the pilot, or she could have been the wife of the pilot, somebody that was looking down and seeing the pilot. You're like, was she having a slip in time where she had witnessed this in a past life? Or
yes, and you know, and that's such a good point, because going back to the story I told a few minutes ago about the family and my interviewee who saw this old-fashioned family at her bedside, possibly, you know, because life is multidimensional and infinitely creative. Yeah, possibly she was looking at herself in the quote-unquote past. Although I'm fascinated by the idea of past lives, but I've since come to believe that it's not so much past lives as simultaneous lives, and it's a simultaneous flowering of life that's happening in every moment.
You know, I had Penny Kelly on the Inner Sanctum, which is our online gatherings. We get together and I invite someone on the show. I'll have to get you into the Inner Sanctum
too. That sounds great.
And, you know, a little tribe of us, we can ask questions and have conversations like this. And she was talking about shifting, you know, like shifting, like, well, what we're going through in our society now, like we're shifting from the old to a new way of being, which is from a fear-based society to a love-based society, you know, fear and separation to love and unity, which is what we talk about, right? But there's plenty of fear. And so she said, you know, in a society where it's shifting, that all gets disrupted. Yes. And people who hold that vibrational frequency when they die, they come back to that resonance, as you call it. But people who shift in this life, when they reincarnate, they come back to a new frequency. So it's like they come back to new earth, which is more, or you know, love and unity, rather than old earth. But as I said, all of it still exists.
Yes,
like it never goes away.
That's exactly right.
And it's just it's like the resonance, like what do you want to experience, like what time frame. So if we're living in this time frame and we're slipping into another time frame, obviously resonating at a similar vibration.
That's right. Yeah. The idea of trying to establish what that connection is fascinating. And, you know, the answer could be manifold. Like there are a million possibilities, but I think it's got to do with a moment of personal connection between the person on our plane and the person on that other dimension, that other plane. You know, something's drawn them together in that moment. Yeah. And it's extraordinary. And similar to time slips, there are two stories of people who've seen their own doppelgangers in my book.
This is the next question.
Yeah.
So you've tuned in. The doppelganger, which is something Penny talked about. She saw herself walking out. You know, she was canning tomatoes and her husband said, come to bed and make love with me. And she said, oh, I guess she got an American accent. Oh, I can't, you know, I'm too busy. I'm canning tomatoes. And so he went to bed. And then as she came to bed that night, she saw herself, the naked her, walk out of her bedroom and go and have a shower. And she just so that there was a part of her that went and did that. And there was a part of her that stayed in the kitchen canning tomatoes. And she's seen it. So that's when I was reading the doppelgangers, and I was thinking of that too. Talk about the stories of the doppelgangers. That's amazing.
There are two in there, two different women who've experienced their doppelganger. So one of them I just love because, I love them both. But so one in particular, a woman woke up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. She went and she was just sitting on the loo, and she looked up, and about 1.5 meters away from her, which isn't very far, there she stood. Now, she was washing, the figure, the double, was washing her hands or seemed to be. So what she was doing was she had her hands together and was moving them, and her face was moving, and it was almost like she was looking into a mirror and washing her hands. That's what it looked like. But my interviewee, who was sitting on the loo, was frozen in fear because she did not understand what she was seeing. And she clocked it enough to realize, to acknowledge that the double was wearing a nightgown of hers that had been a favorite of hers that she'd actually thrown out years ago because it had fallen to pieces with love, like she'd worn it so much.
Yeah.
But her hair was in a way that she'd worn it years before, and there were parts of the double that didn't match her, that were different, but she could clearly see it was herself. Anyway, she was very unsettled by this experience. And then a year and a half later, she'd just had dinner and went to the bathroom to wash her hands. And this is my interviewee, and she was standing in the mirror washing her hands when she realized that was the moment she'd seen. And she had this sense that if she turned her head to look towards the toilet, she would see herself sitting there in the past. So,
but let me
yes.
ask you, but hang on, this doesn't make sense. So she was wearing a nightie
Yes.
that she had already thrown out. So how
That's
could
right.
she have the same nightie on in the future?
She didn't. So there was a combination of factors that, if you like, didn't make sense, that
Right.
involved the past, the present, and the future. So there was almost like a creative aspect to the vision as well. But so at the time that my interviewee had the initial experience and she was sitting on the loo, they were going to renovate their bathroom, but they hadn't done it yet. So a year and a half later, the bathroom had been renovated, and where my interviewee was standing washing her hands, there was a basin and a mirror where there hadn't been before. So in a sense, she'd looked into the future and seen herself there at this basin and mirror that weren't there in that moment.
But wearing her hair and the
Yes.
outfit from her past.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's fascinating.
It's really fascinating. Time is,
time.
it's
So that was like a message that all time is happening at once. The past,
exactly.
the present. It's like, see, there's you in the past standing in the bathroom in the future. I mean, this is
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's exactly right. And I had another interviewee in Spirit Sisters. This isn't a doppelganger story, but I think it speaks to the same topic about time. And she saw a vivid vision. It was a dream, actually, but much more than a dream, of JFK's assassination exactly 1 week before it happened. So premonitions, in a way, speak to this idea of the simultaneous quality of time, which is something Einstein talks about as well. But so this woman was living in England as a nanny, and she was a young woman, and she had this powerful, disturbing dream of JFK being assassinated, who was the president at the time of America. And she was so disturbed by this dream that she woke up, she told her employers about it. And she also was so disturbed about it that she reopened a card that she had ready to mail to her mum for her birthday. Her mother lived in France. She opened it and, P.S. Mum, I just want to tell you about this dream because I'm just so troubled. I dreamt about this, this and this. Then she sealed it and mailed it. Now, by the time her mother had received the card and for her birthday and opened it, JFK had been assassinated, and it had all played out exactly as this lady had seen it. And she said she saw technicolor detail. She saw Jackie Kennedy's pink suit. She saw the blood everywhere. She saw exactly how it played out.
But she also saw the murderer too, which was interesting.
Did she?
Yeah, because I just read it yesterday. She said she saw a guy in military.
That's right. I'd forgotten that detail.
With a gun running away.
That is right. Yes.
Not the person that was arrested and killed for it. Did they kill him or put him in jail?
He was assassinated. Yeah.
Was he assassinated? But some military person.
Yes. You're right about that. I'd forgotten that really important detail.
Interesting. Yeah.
Very interesting. So again, it speaks to all time happening simultaneously, and some of us being able to access either the, past, as we call it, or the future.
Details like this, and the very reason that, I don't even know who to call them, the powers that be, the mainstream world, the mass media, don't want us to develop these abilities because then you can't lie. There's transparency. So if you want to murder somebody, you know, there are people out there, millions of them, that go, oh yeah, well, I could see you doing that, you know, and you can't hide.
That's right. And it's also agency. Like, we'll have our agency. We'll know, we'll take care of our own lives. We probably won't buy into the advertising industry or the, you know, whatever industry, you know, they're trying to sell us.
They're selling you stuff based on fear.
Exactly.
Based on how you're not good enough. And, you know, like insurance companies won't do very well because it's all based on fear. And somebody, if you know that it's all about vibrational resonance, and then when you change your vibe to feeling safe and secure and loved and nurtured, then you're probably not going to have some guy break into your house. So insurance companies are like, you know, household insurance and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And life insurance probably. Yeah. So a whole lot of industry that makes a lot of money on fear, which is probably 99.999% of industry. They don't like it when we start to expand.
I think that's true. I do think that's true, you know.
That's why we have to
about power. Yeah.
About power. Yeah.
Yeah.
Look, fascinating. Okay, so got the cat here rolling around on so love never dies. What's happening in love now? We could talk about spirits. This is the whole thing.
We could, yeah.
So people read it. So who is it for? It's people. It's for people with a curious mind.
Yes.
It's people who. It was written a while ago, and as you say, in your spiritual evolution, you've come to a lot more conclusion and expansion since. Yes. It is written in a very journalistic way, like reporting what people say, more than, you know, explaining why things happened. It's just
that's right.
Yeah,
it's more giving them the platform to share their stories in a safe way. I do, you know, in the introduction and in the conclusion, I do explore some possibilities. For instance, I interviewed a sleep expert to ask about sleep paralysis, which is a fascinating thing, because I realized there were lots of little common points that I picked up in lots of the stories. And one, for instance, was this idea of paralysis coming just before an experience. And I'd heard of sleep paralysis and how it's supposedly a very scientific and very natural happening condition that, you know, lots of us can experience, especially at times of stress. But there were stories that I heard that within my research for spirit sisters that didn't match up to the idea that the answer is sleep paralysis and it's just this very common condition. So I did interview him, a guy, a doctor who could tell me about that, for instance. So I did explore, you know, alternative solutions. I cast the net wide in the conclusion to hear about what could be at the heart of these experiences. But yes, it is more about sharing them, and it's a book for people who love stories and who find a little zing of excitement in them, you know, like awakening that almost childhood fascination that I had. You know, I'm sharing that, like I wrote that in the spirit. You know, there was a show, and anyone, I'll give away my age now, but there was a show in the 1980s called That's Incredible. And I don't know if you remember it, Karen. It was an American show. It was quite cheesy. I'm sure listeners will remember it. It was fun because they'd had a studio audience and they would broadcast. There was a host and he would tell stories about the unexplained. And they'd have, you know, a haunted Toys R Us shop in Anaheim. There'd be a person who, you know, saw a ghost, whatever, all different things. And then the audience would scream out, "That's incredible." And they'd all applaud. So there's that's incredible spirit within Spirit Sisters. There's a celebration, if you like. There's a theme of celebration within the stories. So there's that too.
Sleep paralysis.
Yes.
You know, often sleep paralysis is when people perceive that they're back in their body, but they're not. Like when they're re-emerging back into this, you know, dimension from their nightly sojourns, and they perceive that they're in their body because they kind of don't understand that they can actually leave their body.
Yep.
And they try and move their body, but they've got no control of their body because they're not in it. It's so near-death experiences talk about. Now, I was listening to one yesterday of a woman who died. Now, how did she die? But, she was hit by lightning. So she's on her way to a church service, and she walks into the church service with her screaming children who've just seen
I've heard that story.
You saw that story?
Yeah.
And she doesn't realize she's not in a body.
Yeah.
And she's looking
That's
at
right.
So that happens too with sleep. People don't realize they can leave their body. So They're not
That's a
in
really
their
good
body,
point.
and they're trying to move their body and they can't. And so they feel paralyzed
Yeah,
because they're not in their body.
that's right.
Some people say, you know, I'm beside myself. You can often do that too. You can sort of like not be completely centered in your body, and you bump into things and you have no sort of space, you know, because you're
Very
not,
true.
yeah. So I have a story of my girlfriend who died. She killed herself, and afterwards she was going around to see. One of them is the sister of one of the people in the book, actually. 2 degrees of separation.
That's amazing, Karen.
That
really is.
She doesn't believe in any of this stuff, but Kate, after she died, was in her room. No, she was on her stairs, and she knew she was on her stairs. But then it was another friend of Kate's who didn't believe in any of this stuff either, who woke up with that sleep paralysis. But he felt like someone was sitting on his chest.
Yeah, that's the classic sleep
And
paralysis.
he's completely freaked out because it feels like he's got this ton of bricks on his chest.
Yeah.
And then when he stops freaking out, he has this knowing that it's Kate. And he goes, oh, I'm sensing Kate. And as soon as he had that thought, it existed. And then he sensed her standing in the corner of the room.
Yes.
And he was freaked out too. But she wasn't doing any harm. She was just checking out on, because I was talking to her the whole time after she died. And she was just, she was just seeing.
Exploring.
Yeah, exploring.
Yeah. Well, I think that there is no like coincidence there. Why is it that the condition of sleep paralysis gives rise to other kinds of paranormal, for want of a better word, again, experiences? It's because there's something going on there to do with our spirit being outside our body that, medicine cannot explain. So very handy, to say, just write it off as sleep paralysis. But that's why I interviewed the sleep paralysis expert, because I wanted to understand why this idea of feeling paralyzed preceded so many of the experiences. There's
And
one
what did
story.
He say?
Well, he said he could not explain it.
He couldn't explain it.
He couldn't. He said he described what sleep paralysis is, and then I described one experience where 3 flatmates had the same experience of sleep paralysis on the same night in the same house, which was a place where other kind of strange phenomena was going on. And he said, that's not sleep paralysis. I don't know what it is, but it's not sleep paralysis. So they don't have all the answers. But I think as your friend, as your friend's experience testifies, these moments are broad and we don't actually know what's going on. Like, yes, it allowed fear in, and it allowed the beauty of the friendship of the departed friend to come in. Both of those things came through together,
It's interesting that you say we don't actually know what's going on. But we can ask. Yeah. And we can receive the answers. So when stuff happens that's not taught at school, or that the experts don't know about, or it's on the mainstream media. Mind you, YouTube and the internet's so fantastic because people can have these, listen to these conversations.
So good.
But when stuff does happen to you, all you need to do is ask. It's like, could you please show me what's going on? Like, ask your guardian angel, ask your higher self, ask your guides, ask your inner being. Because everyone's got it. Like, no one's alone. No one's left here alone to navigate this third dimensionality where we're so locked out of this expanded awareness. And so when strange stuff does happen, ask. And if you can't find the answers within yourself, ask someone who can find the answers.
We can find the answers, and they are within ourselves. And and even if we find them through another person, it's because we're all connected. It's a web. It's fascinating. It's fascinating.
Exactly. So we went off track. We were going to go back.
Love never dies.
Love never dies.
Love never dies.
Interesting, because it's the name of, and we discussed this when we were in the car that day, of Elisa Medhus, who's in the Awaken by Death book. That's the, what do you want to call your chapter? Love never dies, which is kind of really obvious. I was surprised that not everyone wanted to call their chapter that, because it's no love, not dying. And so tell me, that's about people.
Yeah, it's about people who've sensed the spirit of a loved one, and there are myriad ways to do that. I wanted to write it because in my first 2 books, I included stories of people who'd sensed the spirit of a loved one. And these to me were among the most powerful stories, In Spirit Sisters, there's a story of a mother whose two little girls died in a horrific car accident.
Yeah,
And
that was sad.
It's such a sad story. And it was only, I mean, it's sad in the sense that my interviewee, Kath, she was wanting to end her life in that after that happened, you know, and which is understandable. And it was on this night of her deepest despair, like the night where she had reconciled that she would do this thing. She wanted to go back. She wanted to be with them. She wanted to be a family on the other side with her girls. And it was on this night that they came to her. And it was so powerful, the experience of seeing them. And she describes them floating down from the corner of the room towards her. Interestingly, she was paralyzed and could only move her eyelids, and the tears were flowing down her face. It was only this idea of seeing her little girls again, who were 8 and 9, I think, or 9 and 10 at the time, little girls, that helped her go on. And so when I realized that these experiences that some people are very quick to dismiss are powerful enough to make a person want to keep on living, I thought I want to explore this in more detail. So Love Never Dies is the third and the last book in that particular trilogy. And it's a very uplifting book because people get the strength to go on, you know, and they find their hearts are open, their awareness is open to a greater reality. They have the means now to go on to a new life, knowing that their loved one is still around, but not in that beloved physical form, you know, which is a grief, of course, that they can't reach out to that beloved physical form. But knowing that they're still around in a different way, it makes all the difference to their lives.
It's definitely a book for grieving people, people who have lost, definitely for grief. Yeah, that's. And it's not too out there, I suppose. So you could give it to people that are maybe just entering this conversation.
You can.
It's talking about time slips and, you know.
No, so it's not
so it's really more about grief and
the love. It's about
the love.
Our loved ones that are gone, and perhaps some people sense them, you know, from anything from smelling the cigarette smoke or the perfume that was associated with them, right through to seeing them at their bedsides, looking restored to health and vitality. You know, there's a chapter in there about deathbed experiences, which I'm also fascinated about. And I interviewed. Oh, I've done that again. I've interviewed a nurse who's a hospice care nurse, and she told me the most wonderful stories of people who are getting ready to transition and the things that they see and say, you know. And again, there are many common threads within those experiences, you know, this idea of the face becoming radiant and luminous in a way that we just don't see in our earthly day-to-day lives. Like towards the end, they get this appearance. You know, this idea of seeing their late loved ones at their bedsides. There's
a beautiful thing. I just want to inject this before I forget, because I think of a million things to say and then I forget. That appearance thing was something that struck me too, about the vibrational frequency or resonance of the spirit. So earthbound spirits, or people that haven't crossed over, they're still believing their stressful thoughts and they're kind of, you know, stuck in that loop, always appeared to be kind of grey.
Yes.
And like not shiny. And then spirits who have, you know, transitioned over and then they've let go of all their stressful thoughts and they realize that they are love and we're all love and we come from a place of love. They always shone and looked youthful and beautiful.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly. It's lovely.
And I was thinking, you know, it's the same on earth.
It is.
It's like when you're believing your stressful thoughts, you look grey. And when you're in love, like whether you're in love with your cat or your dog or your children or your partner,
or life,
you radiate this, you shine like the sun, you know.
It's true. And you can, you know, like you can see instances where people age before their years, you know, because they're focusing and staying, and, you know, it's almost, I don't mean to sound unkind, but it is almost like a wallowing, and we're all prone to do that. We're all prone to wallow in sadness and, you know, hard things that happen in life because it's challenging. But you're right, it is the same, as it is in heaven, as they say.
As above, so below. So going back to your hospice nurse, what were you saying about her?
So I love these experiences as well. And there's a wonderful story about Steve Jobs. I mean, there are lots of contemporary accounts now as well of deathbed experiences and high profile people whose experiences have come into the media recently. And so, for instance, Steve Jobs, whose sister wrote in the New York Times, a very reputable and, first-hand account, she said that he looked past her and through her. She said he looked through her in his last moments, and he just said, "Oh, wow. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, wow." And they were his last words.
Yeah.
And it's just, what's he seeing,
I know.
So great. It's
Can I see it?
great. Yeah, there is that, So Love Never Dies is a real, again, it's a grab bag of experiences, but just focusing on this idea of the loved one. So the people aren't seeing spirits who they don't recognize, or they're not feeling spirits that they don't recognize. It's always, somebody who they've cared about, who's gone, and how they continue to connect.
Yeah, absolutely. I it's funny because I don't really have access to other people's dead relatives if they're not a vibrational frequency to the intention I speak to, beyond this third dimensional world. But I do have often, not always, have access to people I know that I've met. Not often, but I did have a relative who died who I had no access to after she died, even though before she died, she was like 94, just before her 95th birthday. I kept saying, "Will you talk to me from heaven, Hope? Will you come and say hello and, keep the communication going?" And she goes, of course. She didn't really know where she was going, and she kept quizzing me, and she didn't really believe it because, like many people, she was like hesitant. But I didn't have access to her for ages.
Yeah.
And I remember saying, "Why can't I feel you? Why can't I see you? Why?" And then one morning I was waking up, and it was as if just before I was in that, before waking up, just coming into that, where her head pierced some sort of veil, it's like she sort of stuck her head through water, and she put her face right in front of my face and said, "Can you see me now?"
Oh, wow.
and I just, it shocked me awake. I was like, oh, because it was like right in my face, because I had been reaching out, "Where are you? Where are you?"
Yeah.
And she'd been knocking herself out trying to connect, but I had some block to it. So
yeah. And she might have had a block too, because as you say, before she passed, she was in a little bit of confusion. She didn't really know where she was going. So her intention wouldn't have been as firm as yours. So perhaps she was doing some work, as well.
This is true. I haven't thought about it. I'm always thinking it's my fault, but you're absolutely right. This is very true.
Yeah.
So she wasn't a vibrational frequency of the mob I normally talk to. So maybe she had to do some work. Well, she was trying her darndest, because it was such frustration, like, "Can you see me now?"
Yeah.
So I thought she was frustrated with me not perceiving her. I guess she was frustrated with me not perceiving her, but she managed to get through. And then after
she got through. Yeah.
I had better connection with her. But there's always, the connection never dies, even when people just never die. Like love never dies, as you say in the book.
Yeah.
So we don't need to grieve. We don't need to feel separate, because grief is just a feeling of separation.
And it can block, my understanding after interviewing all these people is it can block the communication. But we still need to just allow that process to play out, and be gentle with ourselves, because we are humans, we are physical, we're, incarnate, and you will obviously grieve the physical absence of someone you adore. So, my advice would be just be gentle with yourself and work through that, and don't demand too much of yourself.
Yeah.
So
the next book you want to do is near-death experiences. Is that correct?
I would love to. I'm actually speaking with a lady who's had an incredible one, and she's writing down I'm sort of working with her, encouraging her to write down her experience. And perhaps, you know, if everything aligns and it's all meant to be, I will help this lady get this story out. But I do think a book about NDEs is coming. Definitely. Yeah.
Well, there's plenty out there, but I've got to say there can't be enough of them. I think.
Oh, yeah.
I think we need to provide platforms for people to be able to share their stories, whether they're psychic, you know, stories, time slips, doppelgangers, you know, perceiving different realities. I think that providing a platform where people can share them, especially if they're not well versed in knowing how to write or too scared to come on camera, or it's important.
And there's a sense also, Karen, at this point that it's urgent. Like,
absolutely,
we need to try an alternative. Like, what we've been doing is not working, and we need to try an alternative. And my humble sense is that sharing these stories, you know, looking at these possibilities, it's all part of a healing solution, you know, if we can just have faith in that, you know.
God, you said it, girl. It is urgent. You know, I've had a big wake-up call just having Penny on the show last, and it's only been a week, but I've thought about it over and over again. You know, back in 81, she had this group of beings that she called the robes that gave her some probable realities of Earth's future, right? And many people have had this. I've spoken to many people on the show, like Lorna Byrne, who has angels speaking to her, showed her when she was a child. So Lorna's in her 60s, and so when she was a child, she was shown all these and Earth being destroyed because the human consciousness is just not getting with the program quick enough. Not that the planet explodes, but that the life on the planet ceases to operate. And people that have been on ships have been showed by ETs, you know, probable realities. And Penny said that, you know, we've done a lot of work, a lot of people like us who have been sharing love and stories, but not enough, because
that's right.
Still, you know, when I went and heard that story about the genital, I'm just thinking, oh damn, you know, like you just forget that stuff like that goes on this planet, and you think, you know, what more can you do? It is urgent.
Exactly.
Something that you said at the beginning of this, you said when you were a kid, you saw the sun destroying the earth.
Well, I read about it in a kid's textbook.
Read about it in a
kid's textbook. It was just a fact. It's a fact. And that's what got to me as a kid, because this was in my textbook. It wasn't in a novel. It was in a textbook, and it was very matter of fact.
But it's something that you remembered.
Yes. Oh,
that was like your wake-up call too. And if anyone's listening to this, that is the wake-up call, because that is more a reality today than ever before, that there could be some blast from the sun that's really going to wake humanity up, you know. So it's going to take out systems of corruption, but it's also going to take out systems of survival. That means that we have to come together, because you see what happens in disasters. People come together in unity, right, to help us. And do we need to have some, you know, explosion from the sun in order to bring humanity together in a more unified, loving way?
Well, I think that we've been seeing evidence of that throughout, you know, the last decade, more, you know, the last century, so many natural disasters. And as you say, like, you see people pull together to help each other. And they're like little wake-up calls. This is how it should
wake-up calls.
Are you going to grasp it or not? This is how it should be. Take care of one another, help each other, you know, have empathy for your fellow human.
Like, we can have a wake-up call through trauma, or we can have a wake-up call through awareness, and we have a choice. So do you let your cynical closed-mindedness keep you operating in an old way and then get a sledgehammer moment? I've had many of them. I call them
so have I. That's another show, Karen.
Or do you listen to your heart speaking to you, and like let go of the fear, and let go of the resentment and the hatred and the judgment and the criticism, and open your mind? So darling one, you are doing such wonderful work.
Thank you.
Really are. I just looked at the clock. It's 12:21.
I know, we've just chatted and chatted.
It's gone like that. And more to come. Karina Machado podcast, Spirit Sisters, watch out for it. So you'll see it on places like iTunes and other places. Where else? Maybe Stitcher Radio.
Yes, I mean, I'm
going to post it.
Yeah, I'm not sure yet.
About all that.
It'll come, and I'll promote it. And in the meantime, if anybody would like to send me a story, or if they're interested in telling me about their experiences, please reach out on my Facebook page, Karina Machado, or my website, or send me an email. I'd love to hear about it.
Beautiful.
Love to hear stories. I'll never stop loving the stories.
Absolutely. Well, there's something I was going to say and I've forgotten again. Oh, so many thoughts go through my mind. Thank you so much for being on the show. It's been a blessing, such a blessing, and can't wait to see more from Karina Machado.
Thank you so much, Karen. I'm so honoured to be on here. After listening to you for months, here I am. How did that happen?
I know. Crazy, right?
Yeah. Thank you. And it's lovely to be in touch with you. Love it. Thank you.
Another fascinating show with the brilliant, gorgeous superstar, Karina Machado. Really, she's going to help me out with the Awakening Soul series, because she's got all those fabulous writing expertise. And we were just talking about hatching some plans to have some more events here in Sydney, having this conversation live. She's down a bit south of Sydney, but I've got a spare room if she needs to stay. And how we need to expand this conversation, because these times are urgent. We need to get the love out there. She was telling me about Marianne Williamson, who apparently is running for president, and Marianne Williamson was saying that the conversation around fear is huge, and we need to have a bigger conversation around love to change this world, and it needs to be in politics as much as anywhere else. And so stop vilifying and judging each other, start loving each other. So we're going to hatch a plan, her and I, to spread the love more in Sydney, either through books or events or more podcasting. Yeah, so if you've got stories that you think that could help both of us, contact me. Or if you go to my website, I'll have Karina's contact details there, and her website and everything, links there on the website. The link to the page on my website will be underneath this, either on iTunes or SoundCloud or Stitcher Radio or Mixcloud. We're all over the place, and on YouTube. And share the love, share your stories, expand your awareness. Share your stories in the Awakening Soul series too. Book 2 is hopefully coming out this year with people's awakening stories. We were just chatting about that. And what I'm really looking for is some angelic stories, people having angelic encounters with what they know as an angel. Either they see them. I had Howard Storm talk about when he went through his near-death experience, a young doctor walked in the room and the room seemed to light up, and he thought it was some young doctor. And then when he walked out, he said to the nurse, "Who was that doctor?" And she said, "There was no doctor in here." It was an angel saying, "It's all right, you're going to be all right," everything like that. So I think sharing the angelic stories, just reminding us that we're supported and guided and loved. And sometimes these angelic beings can manifest into what we perceive as physical people. Yeah, I'd love some stories like that. So that's in the years to come, next year. And also ETs, ET encounters, your ET encounters. I want to expand that consciousness too, that we're not alone in the universe, and that we have our ET friends that are much more highly evolved than we are, many of them, most of them. And they're helping us as well. So we have help. There is help. There's help out there to help us overcome grief, to help us expand our awareness, to help us expand our technology, to help us expand the love, so that we stop killing each other and killing the planet, killing the animals, and start living in a different way, in a new way, a new society. It's all part of the shift. Be a part of the shift. So I'd love to hear from you if you have these types of stories, as well as I'll put you in touch with Karina if you've got stories for her too. Near-death experiences. She's looking for near-death. I know I can send her some. Love you all. If you're looking for some guidance into who you are, why you're here, and what's it all about, we can help you. Me and the mob sort that out. Get you activated. I've got a new elevator pitch. You want to hear it? The activator, accelerator, accentuator, and acclimator of the New World Teachers. That's my new elevator pitch. Here's my little friend. Remember to buy the book Awaken by Death, and hopefully I'll get the Amazon links on my website for all Karina's books, because they are fascinating, and you could buy them for friends and family that are waking up, or people that are grieving, especially Love Never Dies. That's great for anyone that's grieving. It just shows that communication from the other side, people that just didn't believe and didn't expect it. It's a beautiful book. Love you all. Mwah! See you soon. Bye for now.